Good day, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Chesterton's Jest, where we keep a critical eye on faith and culture, especially within the Catholic Church today. In an age where even church teachings seem to be shifting, we're here to explore and question the ideas and changes that challenge timeless truths. Through thought-provoking, often humorous perspectives, we aim to bring clarity to conversations others might avoid, holding fast to orthodoxy with the courage to question what feels off track. If you would like to join us as we dig deeper into the faith with reverence, wit, and a touch of Chestertonian insight, you can support this channel by gently pressing the like, share, and subscribe buttons in that order, and we thank you for your support. And now, without further ado, the Holy Wars reclaimed, defending the Crusades. Chapter 1. The Call to Arms. There was once a time when knights in shining armor were the champions of good and the defenders of faith. They were the ones who fought not for gold nor glory, but for the very essence of civilization, Christianity. Today, however, the word crusade seems to have become a byword for aggression, ignorance, and unprovoked violence. It is whispered in modern history books as the great folly of the past, a bloody chapter written by men whose ambition outweighed their sense of justice. But what if the Crusades weren't the monstrous mistake they've been made out to be? What if, in fact, they were a noble and necessary defense of Christianity against the rising tide of Islamic conquest? The Crusades were a series of religious wars fought between 1096 and 1270, initiated by the Catholic Church, with the goal of reclaiming Jerusalem and the Holy Land from Muslim rule. A total of 9 major crusades took place, and while they were not without their flaws, they represented an urgent call to action for Christians who saw their sacred land and faith under threat. Chapter 2. The Crusade That Wasn't. To begin our story, let us first clear up one glaring misconception. The Crusades were not an invasion. No, they were a defense. Picture a man whose house is under constant assault by robbers. After years of destruction, the man finally calls upon his neighbors to help him restore what has been lost. Is he an aggressor or a victim of circumstance? The answer is simple, and so too was the Crusades' ultimate purpose: defending Christian lands, not conquering new territories. For centuries before the Crusades, Islamic forces had been pushing westward, taking city after city, including Jerusalem, the spiritual heart of Christianity. The First Crusade was launched in 1096 after Pope Urban II's impassioned call at the Council of Clermont in 1095, urging Christians to take up arms to free the Holy Land. At that time, Jerusalem had been under Muslim control for nearly 4 centuries, and the city's Christian inhabitants were being persecuted. The Crusaders answered this call, motivated not by the desire for conquest, but by the religious duty to protect Christian pilgrims and reclaim what was rightfully theirs. Chapter 3. A defense, not an invasion. One might object, but weren't the Crusaders the ones who initiated the violence? Again, this is a misunderstanding of the broader context. The Crusaders did not set out on a mission of conquest. No, they answered the call for help from their fellow Christians who were being overrun by Islamic armies. The Muslim Empire was expanding, and with it, the persecution of Christians in the East. The Crusaders didn't create the conflict. They were responding to it. To claim that the Crusades were mere aggression is to ignore the centuries of unprovoked attacks that prompted them. The Seljuk Turks had taken over much of the Byzantine Empire and were threatening Constantinople, the Eastern Christian capital, which led Emperor Alexios I to send a plea for help to the West in 1095. The Crusades were not an unprovoked offensive. They were a Christian response to aggression and an effort to protect the Christian world from further destruction. Chapter 4. The Myth of Christian Aggression. But, you might say, didn't the Crusaders butcher innocent Muslims? Aha! Now we are at the heart of the matter. Was there bloodshed? Of course. But, as in all wars, the actions of individuals should not be conflated with the intentions of the entire cause. We don't judge a nation's righteousness by the actions of a few soldiers who might have taken the law into their own hands. The ultimate goal of the Crusades was not the slaughter of Muslims, but the restoration of Christian lands. It was not about territorial conquest, but religious protection. And lest we forget, the Muslim forces were far from innocent themselves. Decades of conquest, persecution, and the destruction of Christian holy sites had preceded the Crusaders' arrival. The First Crusade, which culminated in the capture of Jerusalem in 1099, was an especially bloody event, with many accounts detailing the Crusaders' violent entry into the city. However, the Crusaders' violence was largely a response to the brutal tactics they had encountered from Muslim forces, particularly the siege of Christian territories by the Seljuk Turks. The Crusaders did not start the bloodshed, but they did play a role in the defense and eventual restoration of Christian control in the Holy Land. Chapter 5. The Battle for Jerusalem. The city of Jerusalem, often considered the most sacred of Christian places, became a focal point of the Crusades. It had been under Muslim control for centuries, and the atrocities committed against Christians in the Holy Land were well documented. What the Crusaders sought to do was not destroy, but to restore. Jerusalem was a Christian city, a city that had been taken by force, and it was the Crusaders' sacred duty to reclaim it. The capture of Jerusalem by the Crusaders wasn't the start of an imperial project. It was a return to rightful ownership, a restoration of what had been lost. If this is imperialism, then so is the act of a man retrieving his stolen wallet. Over the course of several crusades, Jerusalem was taken and retaken, but the Crusaders' primary aim remained consistent: to safeguard Christian communities and ensure religious freedom. The capture of Jerusalem in 1099 marked the high point of the First Crusade, but the city fell again to Muslim forces under the command of Saladin in 1187. This loss prompted the launch of the Third Crusade, 1189 to 1192, which, despite its ultimate failure to recapture Jerusalem, resulted in the negotiation of a peace treaty that allowed Christian pilgrims to visit the city. Chapter 6. Misguided Motives and Real Objectives. Critics of the Crusades often focus on the human failures, greed, corruption, and ambition that stained the campaign, to which we say, yes, indeed. The history of every conflict is filled with both noble aims and ignoble deeds. But just because human folly can often complicate even the best of causes, it doesn't mean that the cause itself is wrong. The Crusades were not a perfect venture, but they were a necessary one. The ultimate aim was clear: to protect Christians, to reclaim sacred lands, and to defend the very principles of faith that were being eradicated by foreign invaders. The Fourth Crusade, 1202 to 1204, is often cited as an example of the Crusaders' overreach and failure. The Crusaders, diverted from their original mission, ended up sacking Constantinople, a fellow Christian city. However, this tragic detour does not negate the larger objective of the Crusades, which was to defend and preserve Christian territory. Despite this mistake, the overarching mission remained one of religious defense, not conquest. Chapter 7. Crusaders or Colonialists. The modern narrative often likens the Crusades to European colonialism, labeling them as the first imperialistic mission. But this comparison is anachronistic and, dare I say, lazy. Colonialism was driven by the desire for economic gain and territorial expansion. The Crusades, however, were a defensive war, an attempt to protect Christian communities from religious persecution and military conquest. The Crusaders didn't invade new lands for the sake of empire. They came to defend and to reclaim what had already been lost. If anything, the Crusades were the beginning of a long-standing effort to preserve Christian identity in a world increasingly hostile to it. By the time the Crusades had largely ended by 1270, many Crusader states had been established in the Levant, including the Kingdom of Jerusalem, which persisted for nearly a century before ultimately falling to the Mamluks. The idea that these Crusader states were simply the beginning of European imperialism is misguided. Rather, they were outposts of Christian civilization, struggling to survive in a hostile environment. Chapter 8: The Crusaders' Legacy. Let's take a moment to reflect on the legacy of the Crusades. Despite their many faults and flaws, the Crusaders left behind a lasting impact on the Christian world. They preserved the Christian presence in the Holy Land. They re-established sacred sites for Christian pilgrimage, and they acted as a temporary bulwark against further Islamic expansion. The Crusades also helped to preserve knowledge. Classical texts, previously lost to the West, were recovered and studied, laying the groundwork for the Renaissance. The legacy of the Crusades is one of courage, sacrifice, and a genuine desire to protect Christian civilization. It is also worth noting that the Crusades facilitated cultural exchanges between East and West. Crusader states were often centers of trade and learning, and although the wars themselves were violent, they led to a deeper understanding of the Islamic world and its culture. The Crusades were not solely a matter of bloodshed. They were an encounter between civilizations, one that left an indelible mark on the history of both Christianity and Islam. Chapter 9: The Age of Reflection. The question we must ask today is not whether the Crusades were flawed, they certainly were, but whether they were evil. To answer that, we must look not just at the violence and excess, but at the greater historical context. Were the Crusaders' actions justified? Were they acting out of a desire to protect their faith and their people? The answer is yes, on both counts. The Crusades were not an unprovoked offensive. They were a necessary response to a world that was being torn apart by forces bent on destroying Christianity. And in this light, we can view the Crusades not as a tragedy, but as a heroic defense of the faith. Chapter 10: The Modern Misinterpretation. Finally, we must confront the modern misinterpretation of the Crusades. Today, they are often used as a weapon to discredit Christianity itself. To those who would attack the legacy of the Crusades, I offer a simple response. The Crusades were not evil. They were a necessary, albeit imperfect, defense of Christianity at a time when it was under siege. So, next time you hear someone spout the tired refrain that the Crusades were a blight on history, remind them that history is rarely as simple as it's made out to be. And there you have it, a defense of the Crusades, not as perfect paragons of virtue, but as the noble and necessary efforts of men who fought to protect their faith, their homes, and their heritage from a world that sought to destroy them. The Crusades were not evil. They were the courageous struggle of Christians in a time of peril, and perhaps, if we could learn something from their example, it is that some things are worth fighting for. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed today's video and share our passion for defending the true faith with a touch of humor, be sure to head over to chestertonsjest.com and check out our collection of bold, pro-Catholic graphic tees designed to spark conversation and inspire conviction. Whether you're looking to wear your faith proudly or share a laugh, we've got something for everyone. Visit us today and join the movement, because in times like these, it's more important than ever to stand firm in our beliefs with style and wit. As Chesterton once said, "A madman is not someone who has lost his reason. A madman is someone who has lost everything except his reason." So let's keep our reason and our faith intact together. Thanks for listening. God bless you, and may the good Lord be praised.